Certain buildings are more than decaying infrastructure. They are predatory environments that wait for a specific type of guest to wander inside. Armaan steps onto a rain-slicked Delhi street at midnight. The downpour has emptied the neighborhood, leaving him as the only person moving through the dark. His phone displays a critical 2% battery warning. In a few moments, his only connection to the modern city will be gone. With the storm intensifying and his options disappearing, he seeks refuge in the heavy, imposing shadow of Hotel Silver Moon. A silent caretaker assigns him the only vacancy, room 307. As the old man speaks the number, a heavy metallic thud echoes from a distant floor. Between the dead battery and the flooding streets, Armaan is now physically and digitally isolated, left to rely entirely on an environment he doesn't understand. The transition begins in the elevator. It groans as it rises, physically lifting Armaan away from the safety of the ground floor exit. On the third floor, the sound of the rain vanishes, replaced by a heavy silence and the rhythmic hum of flickering lights. Tracing the layout reveals an unusually long, narrow corridor with a single yellow bulb hanging at the far end. Room 307 sits at the absolute end of the hallway. There are no secondary stairwells or fire escapes, just the 70-foot walk back to the elevator. The room itself appears unremarkable. Armaan finds a standard bed, a wardrobe, and an old television, the basic components of a temporary home. But the bathroom mirror holds a violent anomaly. Deep, jagged scratch marks have been carved directly into the surface of the glass. The jagged letters form a specific instruction: don't look under the bed. Armaan tries to laugh, dismissing the message as a tired cliché left behind by a previous guest to unnerve travelers. The laughter stops when the vintage television set clicks on, despite being disconnected from the wall outlet. The screen erupts in static, tearing open to flash a screaming woman's face before snapping back to white noise. By manifesting through a dead machine, the entity has bypassed the rules of the physical world. Skepticism is no longer a viable defense. The clock hits 1:13 a.m. Armaan jolts awake into a room that is now pitch black and freezing. A dry, rhythmic scraping begins, the sound of nails dragging slowly across the wooden floorboards. The noise isn't coming from the hallway or the walls. It is vibrating through the frame directly beneath his mattress. Every instinct tells him to stay still, yet he finds himself reaching for his only tool, unable to ignore the scratching. Armaan grips his flashlight, his hand trembling as he slowly lowers the beam toward the dark gap under the bed. He pauses. He is inches away from the threshold where the floor meets the darkness under the frame. Right as the light sweeps under the bed, a disembodied voice whispers clearly into his ear, "Mat dekho." The scratching stops. The warning on the mirror wasn't a piece of advice. It was the final step of an invitation. Morning breaks over the hotel, but room 307 remains dead silent. When the staff finally forces their way inside, they are greeted by a chilling, quiet void. The heavy wooden door had been bolted shut from the inside. There's no secondary exit, no shattered window, and no sign of a struggle. Yet the room is completely empty. The occupant has seemingly evaporated. The only physical indication that someone was actually here is a lone, abandoned smartphone resting quietly on the carpet. But a quick look into the adjacent bathroom reveals a much darker clue. Gouged into the bathroom mirror are deep scratch marks, spelling out a warning. He looked under the bed. To understand how a man named Armaan vanished into thin air overnight, we have to look past the physical impossibilities and retrace his steps. We need to decode exactly how investigating a dark space triggered a lethal, inescapable trap. Let's rewind to the previous night. Armaan is settling into an uneventful stay in a quiet hotel. In paranormal lore, haunted spaces often lie dormant until a specific physical action bridges the gap between the living and the dead. This action acts as a containment catalyst. Armaan triggers the catalyst when he notices movement near his feet. A pale, unnaturally long hand slides out from the dark space beneath the bed. Panicking, he scrambles toward the exit, but the entity has already initiated its first defensive mechanism. The heavy door is entirely locked down, refusing to budge. In a matter of seconds, the architecture of the space works against him. The hotel room strips away its function as a temporary refuge and seals itself shut, trapping him in a perfectly isolated chamber. When a supernatural trap successfully cuts off all physical escape routes, it shifts its strategy. The goal becomes active sensory manipulation, designed to completely disorient the target. The television screen suddenly flickers to life on its own, projecting the stark, glowing image of a ghostly woman. Armaan spins around to face her, but the physical room is empty. Instead, he catches a glimpse of the mirror and freezes. The spatial geometry has fractured. The reflection shows the woman standing directly behind him. The entity begins to smile. Her jaw drops, the mouth stretching open in a slow, unnatural contortion that defies human anatomy. Then the mirror bleeds. Thick liquid coats the glass, spelling out a terrifying confirmation. You looked. This sequence of terror has a specific logic. It is a highly targeted, punitive response, designed specifically to punish Armaan for peering into a place he shouldn't have. To find out why this entity is so aggressive, we have to look past the immediate haunting and examine the history of the room itself. Taped to the bathroom wall is a weathered newspaper clipping, its ink yellowed. The bold headline reads, "Woman found dead in hotel room 307. For years, the public narrative suggested her death was a tragic suicide, but the actual forensics told a different, much darker story of murder. Her husband had killed her in that very room. To buy time, he shoved her lifeless body into the tight, dark space underneath the mattress. This creates an effect known in paranormal theory as spatial displacement retribution. Entities often bind their vengeance to specific physical zones. Here, the trauma zone beneath the bed connects directly to the haunting zone in the mirror, creating a closed loop of vengeance. The entity meticulously weaponizes the exact spatial geometry of her own desecration to exact a highly targeted form of justice. Which brings us back to Armaan's final inescapable moments, staring into the bleeding glass. The entity shifts her manifestation. She is no longer standing directly behind him. Instead, she is crouching low beside the bed. Her physical form now displays the grim reality of her murder. Her neck is snapped backward at an impossible angle, yet her eyes remain intensely locked on her target. In the heavy silence of the room, she softly whispers her actual objective. Now you will take my place. The curse functions through forced substitution, abducting the living to create a physical vacancy in the real world, while filling the dark void beneath the bed. The timeline snaps back to the present. Morning light pours into the perfectly still, empty space of room 307. Looking at the evidence again, the abandoned phone and the dead-bolted bore make perfect sense. Armaan didn't escape, and nobody broke in. His simple decision to peer into the dark triggered a literal, permanent exchange of existence between the living world and the space beneath the mattress. Armaan didn't die in that room. He was swapped. He is now the new, silent entity trapped beneath the frame, waiting in the dark.